For joining us for today. Today we have a wonderful faculty from UK, Professor David. At least some of you might be familiar with write his books or publications. He's a consultant in psychosocial palliative care in UK. He's a social worker, counselor, educationist, and clinical supervisor. And he was a former director of education and training at St. Christopher Hospice, London. And currently he's a visiting professor, School of Education and Health Sciences, Middlesex University, London. He has contributed to several publications and a lot of books that we might have come across during our palliative care education. So some of them are Good Practices in Psychosocial Care, Loss, Grief and Bereavement, Death, Dying and Social Differences, and many, many others. At least some of them we have come across in the libraries and we might have gone to some of it. I'm so glad that Professor David has agreed to be here for the session. I think we are having a session from him for the first time, at least in the last 2 years, probably through the virtual platform. Thank you so much, David, for agreeing to be present with us and agreeing to take a session. And I couldn't find anyone else other than David to handle the session on loss, grief, and bereavement. So thank you so much for being a part of it. Welcome you to the session.
Thank you, Dr. Sridevi. So pleased to be here, everyone. Can everyone hear me okay now?
Yes.
Okay, and
yes,
see me?
Yeah.
So please indicate if that becomes a problem. So I've set the volume high enough, I think. Yeah. So hello and cheers, everyone, from London. I'm only having my afternoon tea here and thinking of you. You might have worked all day or having families, and now you've come to listen to me in the evening. So that's beyond the call of duty, I think. So thank you. I was so impressed by the list I was sent and feel very humble in front of all your experiences and qualifications, but also I look forward to understanding some of your work as well here. And we have colleagues from different countries, including Indonesia and Nepal, which is impressive. That's great. So I'll start with the first slide. So meet George. George was from Kerala, living in London, and I fell in love with Kerala very briefly on that lovely IAPC Congress a few years ago. That was my only contact, and of course been meeting Dr. Raj on different occasions, and hearing so much about all the work going on in Kerala. Exciting. George was a barrister, solicitor, and had a major stroke a few years ago, and a very articulate man, very able, and he, from the moment of his major stroke, was not able to speak, and lost many functions, and the only part of his body he had control over was the right arm that he could lift to his mouth to feed himself. And I'm just kind of doing it to this lecture partly to tribute to people like George and other patients and people I've met on my journey in palliative care. And in a way, I had to be very flexible in communicating I ended up, this was George looking at his best, probably. And I was using touch. I managed to, with it, get his agreement to massage his right foot where he had some feeling. And he seemed to enjoy that and welcome that contact. And we sang a lot of songs. Or I sang, he kind of grunted on occasion. So that was the communication with George. But this 1.5 hours we have together is to look at issues around loss, grief, and bereavement, and the landscape of it. What is it? What can you do about it? And somebody said the pain of grief is just as much part of life as the joy of love. Sorry, I'm trying to move the speakers. I'm trying to move. Yeah, there we are. So I can actually see the words of the slides. Perhaps it's a price we pay for love, the cost of commitment. I hope all of you at some point in your life have been in love and also experienced things like joy, hopefully not depression. But I'm mentioning these because, you know, these are all experiences that are difficult to capture even in words, because they're a total experience, as is the experience of loss, grief, and bereavement. Even using a language denies the experience. And we don't know exactly how to describe all this. I think there are about 44 people here this evening. And if I asked you to write a definition of grief, love, joy, it might all be very different because it's a very personal experience. So greetings from London. If you've heard me speak before, this is a bit my signature slide. And I wish we could talk. I wish we were face to face and could mix and mingle and network. That's what I love about conferences. I always say I don't really have a very big knowledge base, but my team used to, on our away days, when we would talk about each other, they said I was a prime networker. So I wish we had time together to just chat and hear about your own life and your experience. I want to thank Raju, because she soon found out I'm quite phobic about anything IT. And she's looked after me, you know, like a king, and she's been a real jewel. I did warn her if I took on the lecture, and Dr. Sridevi will see that also that I would be a liability for technical stuff. So thank you for helping me and keeping with me. So welcome to you all, and you might recognize a bit of India here. This was my first visit to India after I left Calcutta, where I was born as a child of 8, and I came to London. But I was invited by Tata and I think the IAPC in the 1990s to give a talk on aspects of psychosocial palliative care. And I was living after the very posh hotel in Mumbai, and I moved to Shanti Avedna Ashram, as it was known then, looking after many, many people at the end of their life. And as I left to come back to London and was in the taxi taking me to the airport, I saw 2 women outside. The son and the brother had been taken from the streets the day before and looked after by the team at Shanti Avedna. And what I saw was the face of bereavement. And it's the first time I'd seen florid grief like that on my trip, that trip to India, that first time back for palliative care. And I was very conscious about culture, and probably like many Western speakers, bending over backwards to apologize to an Indian audience that we might be bringing a very European template to the work. So I'm doing that a little bit now, but I realized there's commonality and difference within culture and within the same country and within the same religions and the same tribes and groups. There's commonality and difference. But I saw on the face, it was quite sad seeing these two women, because the son, the patient, had died by the morning, and they were no different to the North London hospice where I was working at that time. So I want to thank Pallium India and Dr. Raj and Dr. Sridevi for kindly inviting me. Very pleased to be here, albeit on Zoom. And Dr. Sridevi, you've been outstanding in your welcome and hospitality. So let me take this chance of just saying a big thank you. Go round and see what is being done and see how your own circumstances can produce another version. There is a need for diversity in this field of palliative care. A quote I like, you might have heard it many times before, from Cicely Saunders, the founder, if you like, of hospice and palliative care. And I was lucky enough to work with her for many years at St. Christopher's while I was Director of Education. And what I'm trying to say to you, just take from what I'm going to say anything that you think is useful and discard the rest. If you're like me, going to conferences, sometimes there's just one or two things one takes away, thinks about, reflects on, and really tries to implement. And I think if that happens, it's been a success. It's been worth going to. So I'd like to start, I'm going to ask from time to time, ask you questions or ask you to participate in an exercise and to take a brief comment back. So, and at the end, I'm going to stay on in case anyone wants to remain to ask me any questions at 8:30 your time. So if you don't have to, but if there's anything that you've not been able to mention or ask, that would be another opportunity at 8:30 as we finish. So I'm going to ask you to just where you are, we're not going into groups for this, just think of something on you, on your person, or in your bag, or in your room that you find is really precious and you wouldn't like to lose. Think of all the times we ask a patient to take morphine or to answer a question or ask how they feel, and we sort of give them 5 seconds to answer. So I'm asking you to think about something that you have on you and something that has meaning. And then we'll take 3 or 4 contributions. For me, while you're thinking, is this wedding ring. That's important. Been on there longer than I like to admit to you. And also this book, which is very precious to me. It's falling apart. I've sellotaped it, and it has an old-fashioned index in the times when we just had to write down everything. So I've got a lot of precious phone numbers and addresses. Why is this precious to me? Because it's the first present I received from my son when he was 6 years old. And he's written something, Dad, here. So it'll be with me till I die. So over to you. Just have a think for just a few minutes. We may not even do 5 minutes, but have a think for a couple of minutes of something that you have that is precious You wouldn't like to lose it. Okay. As we've got a lot to cover, I'm going to ask 3 or 4 people whether they would be brave enough to share that something with us. Would someone like to start?
David, there are a few comments already in the chat by the time you asked. So I'll just read a few. Dr. Punita is telling, I have my family picture near me, and I don't want to lose the moments with my kids and my husband. And Dr. Dheeraj is telling, pen.
So can I just comment on that?
Yes, please.
Yeah, and so that's lovely. Thank you, Doctor, for sharing that. And you know, family, so important. And in the days when we didn't have anything online, the internet hadn't been invented, when we'd go to conferences, you could be sure that many of our friends and colleagues would carry a photograph with them when they were traveling and leaving home. So thank you. And that photograph would certainly tell a story. I hope it tells a story of love, commitment, people who are precious. And of course, what we do with our patients and caregivers is to invite them to tell us their story. That's so important. Thank you. Can we have another one?
Yes, Dr. Dheeraj is telling, a pen, without which he is incomplete as a doctor.
Say that again, please.
Dr. Dheeraj is telling, pen.
Oh, pen.
I'm incomplete without it being a doctor.
Yeah. No, great. Thank you. That is so original. We take our tools for granted, don't we? And sometimes it's the simplest things that open up, and with patients even, open up a whole landscape of feelings and ideas and thoughts. Thank you for that, Doctor. Someone else?
Yes, Dr. Savitri is telling, my father's books are in a shelf nearby, and he always says, this is what I would give you in inheritance. Yeah,
lovely. And so the books speak, and of course the inheritance we inherit, but also we can pass on, and those things are precious. It's precious. Why is bereavement so painful? Why is loss so painful? Why is grieving so painful? It's a sort of is it onomatopoeic word, the word grief in English. You kind of almost feel the pain. It's painful because we're all attached. We're all attached. Maybe the last contribution, is it possible to have someone, so I can see someone, maybe from, invite our colleagues either from Nepal or from Indonesia? If someone's brave enough. Otherwise, Dr. Sridevi, maybe you choose someone if there's no one there.
I'll just ask Dr. Venita, would you like to talk? Dr. David was asking you whether you have anything to share.
Okay, thank you so much. Yes, I'm from Indonesia. About this, thank you for the reminder. This is what I was mentioning, the earring that my fiance gave me back in 2020, before we must separate because of the COVID pandemic, because he's staying in Singapore and I'm in Indonesia. So we know that because of the pandemic, the border will close and everything. So it's kind of like giving something to hold on when we know that we are going to lose a lot of time together, something to hold on. So it's something that I don't want to lose, and to for now getting the chance to reunite it after the border start to open again. It's still become a reminder of the time that we must hold on to when we cannot see each other. So yeah, that's what makes this important, and I wish just to keep this always as like a reminder, in hope that one day if we must be separated in any way, even like we're saying something like we know that one day like death will do us part, but in that sense we try to hold on that even when we cannot see each other, that the love will still be there. Thank you.
Dr. Vinitha, is just beautiful. That's so sensitive. And it's kind of written the whole story of psychosocial palliative care. I mean, those mementos, that is really beautiful. Those mementos mean so much. And of course, working with patients and families, depending on the context, depending if it's a busy hospital or a specialist unit or in people's homes, we can value those things. Those things tell stories immensely. And we use them in connecting with patients and their families, don't we? Thank you for that. Sorry we can't hear more. They sound as though they'd be fascinating if we could. So I'm going to move on. By the way, I've got a lot of slides. I teach very often through pictures, but at some moments of this talk, I'm going to flash very quickly through, but you're very welcome to have the copy of the lecture. And I've even attached some homework if you want to do it towards the end. I will have to remove some of the patient photographs because for obvious reasons, because sometimes the permission is given to me specifically for my own teaching. So loss, grief and bereavement affects everyone. You're all looking very young here, those I can see, but you can't have reached this time of your life without experiencing loss almost every day. We'll talk more about that. I want to leave you with the fact that loss is healthy. It's a human response. It's how we need to live. The definition of resilience is that it's the ability to adapt in adversity. We need to adapt all the time, sometimes over bigger experiences than others. It's not an illness. I don't like it medicalized. But of course, we need to be able to support. And sometimes good medical care, mental health, psychiatric, or the psychological symptoms need medical input. But essentially, bereavement is not an illness. But just this week, some of you will have seen this, those of you who get the European Association for Palliative Care blog. This week was published Professor Sama from Western Australia article reminding us about compassionate communities, the important role that communities have to play, and one idea of increasing grief literacy. Yes, 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 we need all that. I really believe in good public education, but we also walk a tightrope, don't we, in all these models coming together, because as educated as a community might be, we know that communities also can let people down, disappoint them, not support them, disable them, discriminate, disempower, and disenfranchise, and avoid people, don't like the shame, isolate people. And I've often written about social death, the isolation. So yes, we need to work with our communities and value them, especially as this time post-COVID or during COVID. So crying is a very natural response. I said at the beginning, I'd seen that those floods of tears in Mumbai at Shanti Avedna, also in London. I've never found tears to hurt, but more likely to heal. Some societies play up the joy rather than crying, and people try to be joyous. If you're religious, you might want to celebrate what you believe happens to the person after death. But can you see the words at the top of the slide? So it's just I can't see them. I know what I've written, but you know, just remembering this last 2.5 years of the pandemic that we've all experienced. We all have our own stories, some very tragic personal stories. And those of you working through this period professionally, you must be absolutely up to here with the sadness and tragedies and the frustrations of not being able to work maybe as you normally would do. Locked down, locked in, locked up for many of us. I knew Patty. She was diagnosed with Alzheimer's and vascular dementia, looked after by her husband who had advancing cancer. Patty was suddenly overnight when the pandemic struck in a different place. Her visiting nurse could no longer visit. The daycare center was shut down. She couldn't go to church, which she and her husband enjoyed going to every day to listen to mass. And she started spending the nights looking for her parents, desperately looking for both her parents, asking for them when they had died 20 years ago. She also started opening every cupboard in the house, looking for food to eat, not just one night, but every night. And she ended up having to be admitted as an emergency to a nursing home. You will have your own stories professionally and privately. Doing this work, you know that you need to look after yourselves, self-care, use supervision if you can, because we get filled up with emotional issues and we have to keep our boundaries as much as possible. I have found in palliative care, the most professional of people tend to cross boundaries at different times. But remember, emotional pain is catching, and we have to learn ways, strategies to let it go, because you know all this very well. You're very experienced. But you know, we work with the paraphernalia in palliative care of contradictions, paradoxes, ambiguity, uncertainty. But remember people's strengths and resources. There's usually some strengths that you can work with. I say not all of the patient is dying. That may sound a funny thing to say, because of course, physically they are. But people, we get in touch, we see it happen, don't we? People rise to all kinds of occasions. Some people, we identify the depths of sorrow, but also that can be very mixed with the joy of saying well done to a family for having kept dad at home all that time. The adversity in achievement, I'm speeding up now, and bereavement and the growth that we now talk about, which I'll go through. We used to see bereavement in just a very negative way, and now the whole way of teaching it has changed. One man that we had in our daycare center, when the patients were asked to draw a shield and write something important in the shield, and he wrote, "We are strong, no matter how ill we shall be." And he was able to hold on to that. He actually told us in the 20 years since his wife had died, he had never been touched. He had never been touched. So when he was offered some hand massage and some much more closer contact with the nurses, you know, he was kind of thrilled. He shared that. Now, I don't know if that would only happen in England, where, you know, maybe people touch less, but in different ways. It may not be even physical. Societies sometimes isolate people, lie to them, as you know, over their diagnosis or prognosis, etc. So I want to take you through in the time we've got fairly quickly the nature of loss, grief and bereavement, share with you some models and theoretical frameworks, and share with you some of the lessons I've learned for helping bereaved people. Meet Dilip. All the names are fictitious, of course. I also want to say thank you to all the organizations that have taken me on home visits and hospital visits over the years between Delhi and Mumbai, particularly, and Can Support in particular, who I've been linked with from early days and learnt a lot from. So this is Dilip on a home visit, and Dilip, his mother died when he was 8. He ran away from school. He didn't want to know. And this was the nurse and the team visiting fairly frequently as Dilip's illness progressed. And he was quite a determined man, young man. He went on his motorbike, to get his chemotherapy, get to the hospital, quite determined. And I was curious about the pile of books he had. You can't see because they're piled up behind him. He's on his bed. And I inquired, and what he decided as an adult he wanted to do was become an accountant. And there he was, finishing his studies as an accountant. And it was just lovely to know that a few weeks later, he got the news that he'd passed, and he'd reached the end of his course, passed all of his exams. And I think it was just about 2 weeks before he died. So, you know, some of these, I'm trying to remind you, not that you need reminding as such, that, you know, we work with people's strengths and the inner resources they have, and try and harness them. Annie, would somebody like to read Annie's story just fairly quickly?
Annie, 61, is the carer for her 70-year-old partner who is dying of cancer. She has deep regrets that having lived together for 30 years, they never married. He is unhappy and frequently asks for euthanasia. He wouldn't let a dog suffer. Annie feels hopeless. Annie is informed by the police that her only son, aged 45, has died, shot by his ex-lover's husband in dramatic circumstances. She discovers her son has had an affair at work, tried to end it, and was targeted by an extremely jealous husband.
Thank you very much. This is one of my families, a couple I was visiting with our nurse, and the 70-year-old partner of Annie constantly asked us for euthanasia, and he didn't want to live. And maybe you've had similar cases, something suddenly extraordinary happens, and Annie was informed that her son, her only son, had been shot through the mouth after the jealous husband discovered an affair that the son had been having at work, and killed him. And so I was working for a while very much with both Annie and her husband. So one or two comments of what the major losses do you think the major bereavements were for Annie? Any just 2 or 3 comments?
The
A
loss
son
of
of
her,
course.
the loss of her son, but more than that, discovering the tragic or dramatic circumstances under which this end happened.
Mm,
That must have been something that she could not have taken it up.
yeah, thank you. That certainly was, because it was all over the paper one day and every day. So she lost a degree of privacy. She lost any other comment on what was
Yes.
major loss, do you think, for her?
There are a few comments in the chat. One is Dr. Meera is telling death of her son, and Dr. Tendril is telling loss of her son and impending loss of partner.
Yeah, double loss. Yeah, and you know the paradox Annie was dealing with, or the guilt of feeling, why doesn't my partner, 70-year-old, shouldn't he have been the one to die when my son was one of the things, an only son, the only person who could take care of her that she knew. So that was a huge loss of the future. Anything else?
Yes, there are a lot of comments coming in. The loss of dignity in the society.
Yeah, good. Yeah, the shame, there was a huge shame for Annie, because she felt guilty somehow that she hadn't brought up her son correctly and he'd had an affair. So that was her thinking. Yeah, just one or two more comments.
Helplessness state of Annie and anticipatory loss, grief at the loss of her partner.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, anticipatory grief. I'm glad somebody's brought that up. Thank you, because we see that all the time working with people at the end of their life. The grief doesn't start for the family the day after the death. It starts for the patient and starts for the family well before thinking about it, getting some of the feelings already. Thank you. I'm going to move on now. Thanks for that. She also lost contact with her grandchildren, because the son who died, his wife was in total pieces, and Annie was very fond of the two grandchildren, but they were going through counseling and therapy themselves, because suddenly their world had changed. An extraordinary thing had happened. So there were very, very many losses. I'm going through that because I wanted an example that almost took it away from palliative care, to look at loss in this case of the caregiver and what it meant to her. So bereavement is the feeling, the doing, and the thinking. It's holistic. It affects all of the person, body, mind, and spirit. And all these words here have a very similar process. Bereavement is a process. Loss, change, separation, crisis, transition. I'll comment on crisis. And for many people, the bereavement is a traumatic one. I'm not able to cover in detail traumatic bereavement, but that'll be for another time. Trauma is defined as a stressful occurrence that is outside the range of usual human experience, and that would be markedly distressing to almost anyone. So where does loss begin? Where does loss begin? We're told that loss is even on leaving the womb and being born. There's loss. And I'm sorry, those of you who've had miscarriages and stillbirths, you know, we're human too, and it might get us in touch with our own losses. So loss is described in one of the Oxford dictionaries as a disadvantage or suffering that caused by being separated from something. And it's also in the definition, the words used are robbed, dispossessed, and plundered. Quite strong language. the disappearance of a significant object or attribute which has high physical, emotional, or psychological survival value for the individuals concerned. So I'm going to ask you in a minute to tell me examples of the physical impact, psychological, social, and spiritual. So be having a think. But the loss is the person's subjective experience of the loss, since loss of a particular object or attribute for one person may have a different value for another. My silly example of the book will have absolutely no value to anyone except me, because it contains meaning about my relationship and love for my son. So I listed a range of losses here, and you'll see from things that are relatively less important, like losing one's car keys and or forgetting your PIN number. You know, people say I'm very placid, but my anger comes out when I've lost my car keys or my wallet, and I'm blaming my wife for putting it in the wrong place, all this kind of thing. But loss of hopes, loss of not being able to have a baby that you wanted, or failing a qualification, or moving, going to somewhere new in the country where people seem very different, the language is different, and so on. And finally, the biggest loss, the death of someone, death of a parent, child, friend, colleague. You'll all be familiar with the different losses and how one needs to adapt and grieve those. So grief is said to be the personal experience of loss. Mourning is the process occurring after a loss, like rituals and how the loss is celebrated. Bereavement is a turning point in personal development, a psychosocial transition that carries an increased risk of physical and mental health. And there are models of grief which I'll share with you. So in simple terms, bereavement is what happens to you, grief is what you feel, the personal experience, and mourning is what you do, maybe how you live it, how you mark it. So if I asked you, if you were going in on Monday to see a patient, the patient in the chair, on a home visit, or maybe in the hospital, who would you be most worried about? Who would you be most worried about? Because as you know, before even talking to the patient or family, we're getting signs and signals non-verbally that we're trying to make sense of, and we begin making our assessment. As we know too, the family is a system. They act and react to each other, and they're a whole unit in their own right. So to remind us about systems and how important they are. I just recalled the daughter of a patient who told me on a home visit, "Don't give him the morphine, it upsets me." She was talking about herself. "Don't give him the morphine, it upsets me." And I just felt how intertwined her attitude was with what doctors and nurses were able to do in prescribing. So you might make up your mind, who is the most concerning person in this picture? Is it the girl at the front of the picture? Is it the man right at the back on the left? Or is it the younger man on the right, looking away from everyone else? Immediately, he would be my concern as a social worker and counselor, certainly. But in fact, we don't know. We don't know. We need to ask. We need to open up the conversation, and people act and interact. One behavior affects another, and it's like that in bereavement care. So bereavement is a single event with multiple consequences. It's that stone you throw in the water. So people often think of grief as an emotional experience. It is, but it's also a physical, intellectual, social, and spiritual experience. So I'm wondering, could somebody just mention a couple of things that have a physical effect, where bereavement has a very much a physical reaction or impact?
Yes, so actually, physically, the patient who is underwent the phase of grief, he might stop eating food, he might stop
Yeah.
doing work. So there will be like weight loss. We could like see that thing in
Yeah,
him.
good.
And also, we can also see that he's low in energy,
Yeah,
all drained.
Thank you.
So and also the facial expressions of the person, they will be also
Yeah.
like depicting the grief.
Good,
So
thank you.
physically these things
Yeah,
can
excellent.
encourage, like he might be crying all the time, or he might be angry
Yeah.
at the time, like all the time.
Yeah, thank
So-
you. So can we go on to psychological, the cognitive aspects? Somebody else?
Having low moods,
Low mood. Yeah, very much so. Yeah, good.
unstable moods,
Yeah, memory, able to retain information. So there are implications for us as practitioners and clinicians. If you know somebody is shocked, memory problems, you're having to write more things down or check, give information to other members of the family as well, checking back with the patient or the caregiver what they've understood. Very basic, good practice things. Social, could somebody just comment one or two things? Social implications?
Yeah. Yes, sir. So socially, he might detach from the societies, from the friends. He might
Yeah,
stay away from them and like lock himself or herself in a room.
Yeah,
Or
isolation.
there's another chance also, like the reverse can also happen, that after a period of time, the the person who is underwent the grief, he can socialize more.
Yeah.
Like he will start going out with the friends, so that he will
Yes.
get over this grief. So these
Yes.
are the two things that can happen.
Thank you. Thank you. And last of all, spiritual. Just one comment on the impacts spiritually on the person.
Spiritually, it's going to be
why me question?
why God did this to me.
Yeah, very much so. The why question. Yeah. Sorry, did somebody else have a comment as well?
Yeah, when I lost my mom and due to liver cancer, I had this question that there are a lot of patients who survived liver cancer when she was operated along with them. And then whenever I see any such patient who survived after a liver transplant, I always wish, why my mom? I mean, she had the least complications. I mean, then why it was her? I mean, why she had to go so early?
Yeah. I'm sorry to hear about your mum, but thank you for sharing that. It's a very typical reaction. You know, why my mum, and you know, why my husband or wife. Yeah. And also, you know, they lived good lives, or we've lived good lives, and yet it's happened. Thank you. I've just done a summary there of some of the things, the key things that we need to be aware of. The psychosomatic symptoms. Sorry, cardiologists among you, I'm not a cardiologist. I hope I've got some of that right. Memory, I've put under intellectual or cognitive, a loss of self-esteem, loss of confidence. When I had a very traumatic experience happen to me, I couldn't even pick up the phone and contact the GP to make an appointment. I'd forgotten the phone number. A friend had to drive me to the family doctor, the GP, and basic things that normally I would have done standing on my head. Social, yeah, certainly people avoiding you, or there's an element of shame in the community, difficulties facing others, and practical things like money, economic poverty and problems, and housing, all kinds of things. And then spiritual, the why, the guilt. A lady said to me, the husband died of brain tumor in the hospice palliative care unit. She had had a long psychiatric history, and everyone, including her children, was saying, you need to go back into the inpatient psychiatric unit. But she was very upset that it was her soup, the way she made the soup, that had given her husband a brain tumor and killed him. And it took a long time working with that sense of guilt. So I'm moving on now. A bit about crisis. Bereavement's meant to be one of the major crises we have in life. And it's said to be an upset in a steady state, you know, life going on with all the problems, but it becomes a massive crisis when you bereaved. But every crisis represents a novel situation in which novel forces, both internal and external, are involved. It's said to hold potential for change. And as we know, on all these fancy posters and things, we see crisis meaning opportunity. The loss of a loved one is one of the most intensely painful experiences any human being can suffer. And not only is it painful to experience, but also painful to witness, because we are so impotent to help. So now I want to go through 3 models to help you with a kind of what we used to call a map and compass, a sat-nav, to understand different understandings of bereavement. And the first research was from the US, the Coconut Grove nightclub fire, where a lot of people died. And this research by Lindemann tried to look at the commonality amongst the survivors. And it included somatic bodily distress, hostile reactions, and even developing traits of the deceased person. So we're looking at the landscape now of bereavement, and the phase and stage models. I guess you'll be very familiar with these. I've collapsed them into kind of one slide, but I've given you other phases and stages after this to take away and look at for your homework. So the denial, no, that can't be. When my mother phoned me, when I was a young social worker, counselor, and she said, Dad, the dentist has found something in Dad's mouth and has advised him to go to the hospital, the hospital, and he's been diagnosed with oral cancer. And they've offered him an operation which involves cutting away half his tongue and the base of the foot of his mouth. And I said to my wife, you know, that can't be. Dad's never been ill. He's never been to hospital. I know doctors make mistakes. It's just not true. And I had that mindset for 2 weeks. Then it was the anger. Why didn't the GP recognize it early? Why did it have to be a dentist who caught it much too late, and so on? The bargaining, which you'll be familiar with, Kubler-Ross, and the stages that she identified, but stages that can happen not in any neat order. You can go through all the stages even in one day. But one of the stages she identified was the bargaining, if I'm a good person, can I live for 3 more years to see my daughter get married? That kind of thing. And finally, the acceptance resolution. The lady who called me in the palliative care unit, she was about 80. She didn't really connect closely with anyone, but she was always a little bit angry and uncomfortable about life. And one day she called me and said, I'm now ready to sail out of my harbor. I'm ready to sail out of my harbor. And she did. 3 days later, she died. But she'd kind of gone through, I felt she went through this process. The Colin Murray Parkes, The Assumptive World and the Psychosocial Transitions, about looking at grief as your whole world being smashed in smithereens, in small pieces. And the healing and the bereavement is about piecing that world again. So this is different ways of looking at phase and stage models. But I'm going to come on to this one. This is quite important and one I like, that bereavement is living at 2 levels, 2 processes. And one process is the loss, and one process is the restoration, getting on with life. The loss is about grieving in a traditional way, crying, severing bonds with the loved one, avoiding getting on with life. People who make a shrine and don't want to leave it, don't want to touch anything where the 17-year-old had all his things, don't want to move on. And then the restoration, getting on with things, new life, making changes, learning new skills, doing things for the first time maybe, going to a class, meeting new people, new relationships, a new identity. And healthy grieving is an oscillation between these 2, moving from one to the other. So, and that's healthy grieving, having some sort of balance between the 2. I remember the day I phoned a lady 6 weeks after the death of her husband, and I offered her a visit. We used to always offer a bereavement visit to assess the person and the family and see if they needed help. And she said, okay, you can come, dear, if it makes you feel better. You can come if it makes you feel better, she told me. And it was her way. That day, she didn't want to be reminded of the palliative care team. She was getting on with life. But maybe the next day or the next month, it was a religious festival, maybe Christmas, it may be his birthday, and she could be right back in the loss mode. Yeah. So this is one I like, because, you know, we do move between different phases and stages as well as places. And this is other ways of other interpretations of that dual process. This one I like. This is the 3rd model I want to leave with you. And it was created really by a relative, a family member, a survivor herself whose baby died. And she went to a group for parents whose children or babies had died, and her child had died. And if you look at figure 1, she said that was her world. That was her world when her child died. Everything was bleak. Everything was just terrible and in turmoil. And she was told that one day her world would be like figure 2. Her world would carry on, would change a bit. It's going dark blue and yellow, but her grief would shrink and take on a much smaller proportion, as in figure 2. It wouldn't dominate her whole life. And she said, yes, that happens to a lot of people, but it wasn't like that at all for me. And she drew figure 3. Her world stayed still the same size, her grief still the same size, but her world grew around it. It took on a completely different shape, because you can never go back. For a while, people want to go forward and keep looking back to their grief and pulling back what's past, but you can't. You need to go forward and take your grief with you into your life, but your life has changed and another shape. You'll never be the same again. And I've used this so often, even in my couple counseling, when something big has happened to the relationship. For example, one partner has an affair and the relationship will be changed forever because you didn't expect that to happen to you. But people do grow, but in a different way. And I found that quite a helpful thing. I've drawn that sketch for so many people and they've valued it. So I'm going to go very speedily through the other things I've prepared. Some of them are for you to take away. So as you know, so I'm going to spend 5 minutes and then we're going to meet Jay, the patient for the case scenario today. So we can only work, as you know, with what the patient or the family bring to you, with what's accessible. And you will be familiar with this kind of thinking. Here we have on the right our wonderful holistic model of palliative care, physical and the psychosocial elements. And much of our skill is in bringing what's under the iceberg to talk about if the patient, using our professional skills, if the patient or family want it and at the time they want it. It's not always good 5 minutes to bring up some discussion 5 minutes before she has to go to school to collect the children, for example, when she wants to keep her public face on. And bereavement, to do a risk assessment, we need to think about the characteristics of the deceased person. Were they a child? Were they a parent? The nature of the illness, was it traumatic? Was it sudden? You know, cancer can be an awful thing, but it's wonderful because it does for many families allow time to say goodbye and prepare and understand what's going to happen. Not quite the same as the 15-year-old I met who had an almighty row with the dad the night before. And the next day, dad went to work and never came home because he was in a car crash, a fatal car crash. There's the interpersonal relationships that will determine the type of bereavement reaction and the characteristics of the bereaved person themselves. If they've had a number of other losses and so on and so forth, if they're isolated. I'm going to leave you to go through that in a bit more detail. So for traumatic bereavement, I've listed all those things, including tsunamis, and you will know in Kerala and so many other places, Indonesia, Nepal, all the terrible, shattering effects of the disasters that you've experienced. And for all of us at some level with the pandemics. So I'm going to skip the details, just a summary of grief following a traumatic death. I've built a few slides in about children for you to take away as well to look at, because we don't have time to go into detail about children in bereavement, although I'm happy to do that with you another time. The one message is that You cannot not communicate with children. You cannot not communicate to children. They're intuitive, they listen into phone calls, they read your body language. It's very difficult to lie with them. So I'm going to skip this exercise because we want to get on to Jay. So just remember the importance of attachment and why grief is so painful. This is a lady whose baby died, and her healing, her strength was because she was a sculptress, and she sculpted many sculptures which got her through her bereavement. This is her with her husband, and she felt she didn't want protection, but she certainly needed support. And I think many people do. They need that support, whether it's from a community or from their family or friends or from us. And there's the whole concept. Sorry.
Sorry, that was a background.
Okay. So I'm just going to finish off these slides. I'm going to leave you. I've put quite a lot of home learning in, and just think about disenfranchised grief, when people are not allowed to show their grieving because it may be an illicit relationship. The relationship's not recognized, the loss is not recognized, and the griever is not recognized. And I've met people for many years who've not been able to talk about a loss. So I'm going to leave you with one or two takeaway messages before we come to the case scenario. The key thing I've put at the top of the list is good listening to what the bereavement means to the person. Find out the meaning, and don't feel you need to give any cliches or you need to speak. Just listen. And you probably, if you do Wordle every day, you might know that listen and silent use the same letters. So don't forget to use silence, which I'm sure you do in your ordinary practice anyway, to listen to the person's story. If I have another time with you ever, I'll come to in more detail to some of these, but I want to come to Jay and introduce him to you. And these I wasn't going to go into at all. I'm summarizing basic core communication skills, counseling skills, just to remind you that all of your skills are really important to carry on using. Don't give up on them, and in your teaching for others as well. So I'm going to change gear with this couple I worked with. The husband had motor neurone disease, ALS, and that wife was very, very angry of the losses. Sorry, this is all homework for you, I know, revision about using your communication and core counseling skills. I've done, this is for you to print out or keep on your wall or on your favorite to draw, just a summary of loss, grief and bereavement from my own practice, things I've learned. So you might find these useful or for using in your own teaching, maybe. So now, Dr. Sridevi is going to help us with this exercise to, sorry. So we're going to meet Jay, and we'd like to ask you, after you've met Jay, to think of what are the losses he's experiencing and what are the interventions you might just briefly to mention some of the interventions you might use. So while someone's reading this out, I'm going to fetch Jay. He's waiting to meet you.
Hello. Hello.
Yes, yes.
Jay from India lives with his wife, no children. His condition is deteriorating. He is weak, but he is a fighter, and his motto has been never give up. He is frustrated that his wife, Sarita, works at some distance and is out for very long hours, leaving him with some domestic help and no car. Today, he is extremely frustrated with the hospital and the clinical staff for letting him down, and angry with the inefficiencies of the health system. He is anxious to get back to his job as manager of a small construction enterprise, and is doing his best to sort out things. Anything more? That's all.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Doctor. So let's meet Jay. Anyone in here?
Who's that? Who is it?
Jay. Hi, Jay. I'm Shri from palliative care team. I'm here to visit
Oh,
you today.
no, palliative care team. Oh, no. Come in if you can do something for me. Come in.
Hi, Jay. How are you doing today?
What are you? How am I doing today? I'm trying to contact Martyrs Hospital every day. Just a minute. I need to phone them. Hello? Who's that? I want oncology, I tell you. Oncology. Not here. But what? I want oncology, chemotherapy, brachytherapy, something, immune, radiotherapy. Oh, you fools, bloody idiots. They don't know anything.
Jay, you look so upset and angry today. Would you like to tell me more about it?
Doctors, no doctors, every day I phone. Just a minute, I've got to write down the time. Every day I phone, I call them, they're rude, doctor's never there, always playing golf, going to conferences, going to all sorts of things, doing their research, but no one to see patients.
I'm so sorry, Jay, that that is happening to you. We are here to help you, Jay. Would you like to tell me more about what you're going through right now? You look so upset today.
I have 50 men waiting for me to go back. I'm manager.
Jay, would you like to have a sip of water?
I tell you, I need to work. I need to go back to work. I was best business enterprise in India, and now I want to work and no doctor to see. Sarita, she goes to Ranchi every day, goes to work, come back, eat, sleep, and go off with the car. What would you do?
I understand that you're going through a lot, Jay, right now. And we are all here to support you through this.
I'm just pencil. That's all I am. You always want to give me morphine. I don't need morphine. I want to get better. Can't you help me get better? I'm just pencil. Please help me.
We all are there, Jay. We all are there to support you, Jay. Rather than giving morphine, we can talk about it. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'll de-roll.
Excellent.
I'm really not Jay.
I know.
I'm David.
Excellent.
So that you thank Dr. Sridevi, who bravely stepped in, not to role model any perfect clinician. It's more for us to give you an idea, to bring the case study to life from a psychosocial point of view of the losses Jay was living with. So we'd ask you to maybe we just for 5 minutes go into a group. Is that possible, Raju?
Yes, it is possible. So are we good to go into breakout?
So we need to go into so can I just invite a few brief comments about, first of all, what you saw as the needs of the losses.
So I'm from group 5. It's a loss of health, first thing. It's a loss that he doesn't have children. It's a loss that he doesn't have a livelihood. It's a loss that his wife is working alone and she's managing the show all around. It's a loss on the part of the doctors that they just are allaying his maybe pain, giving him morphine, and he fear that no one is working on his disease per se.
Thank you. Oh, that's a great summary. Wow, you said all the key points. Lovely.
Besides that, he's also having a loss of job, loss of freedom and mobility. So he also he is lagging the support system that could like help him to come out of his grief, because like right now he's really in anger. The patient was angry. He was continuously like lagging.
He has loss of his social status. He has been the breadwinner and a successful entrepreneur. He has lost that status, and accordingly he lost his self-esteem as well.
Yes.
And he feels less cared about by his wife. And he feels he is very frustrated about the treatment he gets from the hospital. He links everything together and he seems to blame it on somebody, blame it blanketly over the doctors, saying that they are irresponsible.
Yes. Thank you.
And I would also think there is a loss of understanding about the true nature of his disease. So he is sort of having unrealistic expectations for the disease. That is why he is asking them to do something. So maybe that is.
You've between you and the chat messages have really captured the key losses, the kind of psychosocial area that he's dealing with. Did you notice he used a phrase 2 or 3 times? Did you notice the phrase he used? This is a real situation that we had. He used the phrase, I'm just pencil.
Sir, yes, sir.
Did you notice that?
Yes, sir.
What do you think he meant by that? Because that was the key to the bottom line for him. The
being
worst
used.
lot.
Sir, yes,
He's
he
just an
used.
inorganic person, sir. He doesn't have a value.
He doesn't have a value. Good. Sorry, what was the lady saying?
Sir,
Ariba?
I thought maybe we say like the person is like a pencil, like he might have like been on like having a weight loss, or maybe I'm wrong.
He kept saying, I'll only be a pencil. That's all I am. Because how he what he was trying to say, when I die.
He can be erased off.
Yeah, that's exactly.
Erased.
When
Yes,
I die, I would just be erased. And forgotten. You know, this feeling of having no self-esteem. And that was like a spiritual, if you like, spiritual pain, because he felt worthless, was socially, work-wise, but also he wouldn't be remembered. So when we got to that point, it opened some doors for the areas he really needed to talk about.
Yes, sir. Spiritual therapy, definitely.
Yeah. Thank you. Can I just have 2 or 3 very quick contributions about the particular interventions, other than the importance of listening, getting him to express himself into words, took away some of the anger. On the first visit, it took 2 hours. Patient, it's very rare you have the time to spend 2 hours, but he was so angry. He was so angry to get behind the anger because he didn't want to take morphine or cooperate at all. Yeah. So 1 or 2, or maybe 1 or 2 contributions about what were the interventions you would try.
He was communication from the hospital. He needs more communication from the hospital. A personal number from a doctor will make him feel more comfortable.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah. The person, Jose, who's saying CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. Can you say 1 more word about that? Person who's just done a chat on cognitive behavioral therapy.
Actually, he may come into terms with the reality rather than go for unrealistic hopes. He may accept the reality by this therapy.
Yeah, good. Thank you for that. Yeah, lovely to help join the reality between what the palliative care team is offering and the cures and treatments he's hoping to get. Yeah, maybe 1 last contribution on interventions.
So we just want to ask him what insight he has about his disease, like how much he knows about his disease. And one more thing is, he was not for morphine. He was not willing for morphine. So why was he against morphine? Like why he didn't want to use morphine?
Yeah,
because of the side effects or because of something else?
Yeah, to explore what it all meant to him, and more information, as well as particularly exploring why he was so anti-morphine.
Yes.
And again, it may just be clear in information and the fears and fantasies around morphine that needed clarifying. Yeah.
So we could also have supported him financially so that her wife could have stayed with him, and that would be a great help, because he was not having, actually the core problem was that he was not having anyone around him, so he couldn't speak about it. That's why he was getting depressed and anger, and he couldn't, like, maybe he would have gone into like that phase where, like we already said, that he was feeling the spiritual pain also. So
yeah,
maybe he could have like expressed it more.
Yeah, thank you. I hope I didn't offend the person from Ranchi here. I don't know, I haven't identified you, but when I lived in Kolkata, Ranchi was a very well-known place that I remember. So I'm going to tie up. I've got 3 more slides to show you as take-home messages, as you do. I hope you give take-home messages in your teaching. I'm trying to get back to the slides now. So first of all, thank you for getting into the issues of Jay so quickly. It was very important. You can see doctors think really quickly. And, you know, Cicely Saunders told me that time, because we never have enough time for anything, but she told me time is a question of depth and not of length. And it's true, because often we have 5 minutes, we have 10 minutes, 15 minutes if we're lucky. And it's very unusual to have spent that first visit with Jay for 2 hours, because sometimes you can just go around in circles, but time is very precious. But you know, focusing, as we know, sometimes patients want to get straight to the point, or we can help them do that. Some of you would have seen this, and it's the Chinese symbol for listening. And we need to listen, of course, with our ears, but also with the whole person. We try and model whole person care in palliative care, with our eyes, certainly, noticing, seeing, and undivided attention for the few minutes you have with that patient, but also with the heart. We need to listen with the ear of the heart. So I'm going to be leaving you now with one of my favorite pictures, which is this giraffe. And I think I was told it was an Arab proverb that the good Lord gave us 2 ears and 1 tongue, and to use it in that proportion, to listen more than just speaking. And in my work as a social worker, counselor, and I've been in palliative care for 500 years now, I'm afraid, that I do think that people have stories, even if they can say them fairly briefly. They have stories in them which sometimes unlock what needs to be unlocked. So thank you very much for listening. It's just gone after 8 o'clock in India, and it's just after 4 o'clock in London. So thank you very much. It's been lovely to meet you. I hope one day we might meet in person. And I think I've met 1 or 2 of you at conferences before. So I'm going to stay here for a little while. If people have any other questions, they want to come back, don't be shy. I don't bite. So please, if there are any questions and you can stay, then we can do that. But thank you very much, and all the best in your work.
Thank you very much, sir. That role play was actually, it will stay with us for a long time. Thank you very much for taking us through this so beautifully. And all your take-home points are always going to stay with us. Thank you so much, sir.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you, David.
Good night.
Bereavement and loss. I was wondering how your personal relationship with the whole idea of death and the fear of death has evolved or changed, and how you see the concept.
Oh, wow. You're giving me something to think about. Is this, who was it speaking, please? I couldn't see you. Who asked that question?
My name is Savitri, and I'm the one who asked the question.
Lovely, very deep question that challenges me. After I worked in my first job in palliative home care team in North London, the first multi-faith palliative care hospice in the country, I really tried to value life much more, and not to take things for granted. And especially of all the groups, children who were dying, young mothers and fathers, I particularly felt a deep sadness and empathy for recently retired people who had worked, brought up their children, and didn't live to enjoy the fruits of their labors. You understand? And so one thing it has helped me is think about trying to live as much as possible the values that you value, and also saying things to my children and people I love while I can, rather than leave it too late. And my children always, or friends, laugh at me because I'm always writing cards to people for any occasion, or I like parties or family gatherings, you know, this sort of thing. I don't know if it's made me any braver. I've managed to find my religion. I don't stick to the orthodoxy because I've had to find what my meaning for myself. And as I grow older, I'm a bit braver to depart a little bit on some things from what my parents taught me. My parents will be turning in their grave, but I feel I need to be more honest to myself about things I believe, about afterlife, about and whatever the Bible says or any religion teaches, it boils down to me for love and charity. Love and charity. Those are the two pillars. I feel if I can do any good, or even to despite all the wise books written, I feel personally that's what my belief, how doing the work and seeing many people dying, even people high up in a religion, ministers of religion, always have also the doubts and fears. You know, they're not automatically anesthetized from some of the huge doubts and uncertainties that people have.
So does it get better with time, or does it ever get easier, sir? That's the work.
The work.
You have to call it the work sometimes to make it, or is it still as hard as it was when you started, sir?
Probably not. I feel, you know, I have imposter syndrome. Have you heard of that? Imposter syndrome is like always doubting yourself. You always think other counselors can do it, but I always feel I only know so little. But I've become a bit more confident as I get older, and I've had more experience with patients and families. I'm always, each time, even now, I do bereavement counseling, and I do counseling for couples, which are sometimes very sad situations, particularly when couples have had very brutal childhoods, lots of difficult things. And I feel really sad, you know, the empathy. I can still cry very easily. And I often feel that I'm not good enough to help them. I often fear, because you're trying to get alongside someone with their lives. They've been brave enough to open themselves to a team or professional and going through all their fears. So the doubts and the fears haven't left me, but I know I need that to appreciate that every single person is unique. And just because you've had 2,000 people you've seen in the last, you know, few years, it doesn't make any difference. For this person, it's their first time. So I've learned that, maybe more insight into myself, but I'm generally more confident because I know some skills really work, although it's a very first time for this patient or this family.
Hi, David.
Thank you so much.
Just a question on, just curious to know this, disenfranchised grief. How do you make them open up to you, and all unconventional situations, what do you tell them? How do you help them with that situation?
I mean, it's a unusual story, but the first day I started as a lecturer at university, I had always been a practitioner doing my work and interested in teaching, but I was appointed to teach at university level on psychosocial palliative care. Though literally the first morning I arrived, you may have had a similar experience, you know, when people see you as working in palliative care, cancer care, counseling, nurses, doctors, they open up to you and think maybe you've got the face to listen. So this is what happened to me. One of the lecturers, this was the first morning, first time I met her, she said, "Oh, you're the person who's come to teach palliative care and bereavement." And she immediately said, "I've not spoken to anybody about this, but some years ago, my lover died while we were making love, while we were having sex, and he died. And I have not been able to share that with anyone because it was taboo." So that's one example of disenfranchised grief, that more to personal level. And she needed, I mean, the poor woman who, she loved this man. It was an unacceptable relationship in society, and she had no one she could tell about it. So the suffering she must have gone through, and she unburdened herself by deciding, she thought this was my job, so I could listen to her, and that helped her just expressing it. It unburdened her so much because the tonic, the medicine, is putting it into words. In psychoanalytic terms, I learned that the ego is the bit of yourself between the superego, your conscience, and the id, which is all your drives and sexual and aggressive drives. And the ego is what keeps you in balance. And I learned that talking is an ego activity, not ego as we use it now, to have a big head or feel very important, but to keep you in balance. And talking is the medicine, or opening up some areas, because you can't spend 10 hours talking, but opening up areas for the person to do their own work, their own reflection. So loss of a pet, you know, in England, everyone loves pets. You get thousands of pounds by charities for pets. People love horses, dogs, cats, and everything. So, but a pet, it's very sad to say that sometimes many of our patients, their main relationship is with a pet companion. So, but some people will not accept that, wouldn't recognize that losing a pet can be quite important for some people. And a colleague at work, you know, you may be fond of someone, but sometimes you grow very close to your colleague. I used to do home visits with a nurse, and I probably spent more time, you know, every day going on visits, more time than with my wife. And one day she got diagnosed cancer, and the whole team were really, really upset because it's not meant to happen to one of us. So it's those relationships where people don't always recognize the importance of that bereavement and how deep it can go. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does sort of. So talking is the medicine, and I think this is something which we get good with once we keep doing it. We get the right words and we get the right sentences. I guess that's the way to go about it over a period of time. I think the gray hair shows that you have had a rich share of experiences of how you have dealt with people.
That's very kind of you. even when I show colleagues or my children, my grandchildren now, photos of me jet black, they're quite shocked. Any other
Thank you so much,
questions?
sir.
Thank you. Nice to meet you. Dr. Sridevi, do we have to finish, or can we have one more question? Or
yes, we can have one more question if there is any. If they're happy to stay
Can I
back.
just ask you, you had mentioned about your friend having ALS. Could you just tell how he's doing and how the family is coping? Because I also have a friend who's doing very badly with ALS right now.
ALS, what we call MND?
Yes, yes. So you had shown a picture of your friend.
The couple, the husband and wife.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, that was a patient some time back. Sadly he's died now. He was a chef in a psychiatric hospital, and he had quite a quick onset and a poor prognosis with ALS. And you know, when Cicely Saunders started palliative care, she concentrated on cancer and ALS, because the symptoms, and it was very distressing for the patient and family, but also for the staff. Well, he had quite a swift illness and died, and his wife, her whole world disintegrated, collapsed, and she remained very angry. One nice thing is I used to notice the 17-year-old daughter sitting behind the door on her own. And because my job was as the social worker in the MDT, one day I said, you know, how's it for you? Because, you know, we're always talking about dad's illness. And she began to open up and said, well, I'm doing my A-levels, the end of school exams. And she said, I want to be a lawyer. And I want to go to university, and no one at all in their family had ever been to university. And so I talked to her about it, because she seems so isolated. As you know, all the attention goes on the patient, or, you know, away from other members of the family. And I felt that was a really good piece of work, because she opened up to me, because her mother was so angry she didn't have time to attend to her. But I never know if she eventually went to university, because then he died and we did some bereavement follow-up, and that was it. On to the next patient. I'm sorry to hear about your friend.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'll just share one thing. One of the children we have, a 5-year-old child, she was cared for, she was discharged by Great Ormond Street, the main children's hospital in London. And our home care team, palliative care team, took on seeing the patient. 5-year-old daughter had a brother who was 3 and a brother who was 10. And the whole family beautifully cared for her, and she died, and we were all very involved. And one day, not so long ago, I went to church, and there was a funeral going on, a mass to remember the dad of the family, and it was the dad of this 5-year-old daughter, and the whole family were there. And I went to express my sympathies, my condolences, and these 2 brothers were there, who were 3 years old and 10 years old at the time. And I said to the 3-year-old, you know, I'm David. And he said, oh, I've heard my aunties and my mother talk about you. So this is years later. And he said, I said, oh, you won't remember me. And he said, I recognize your voice. He was only a child of 3. And he said, I always remember you being calm and talking to us, because I used to have sessions talking to the children. And I'm just sharing that because, you know, don't underestimate what you do. And it's the small things. You know, he could remember, he was a 3-year-old child, and yet he recognized the voice. So keep up the good work. Nice to see you. Did Molly?
Thank you, David. And thank you all the participants. And I can notice that most of them didn't want to leave, although you said they have the option to leave after the session. So that's a wonderful way to
Lovely
convey
to
that.
meet everyone. A lovely group. And I'm sure, you know, they have rich stories to tell. And and one day it would be nice to have 10 minutes to chat to you, Sri, and also to know where you've been in England and about the Cardiff course that I see you've done. And so maybe if you ever have time, it would be lovely to have a little chat.